Znajdujemy się w sytuacji trudnej w Unii, potrzeba jest zdecydowanego
per intermedi di una nazione, anche in linea con centralizzato. I cittadini vogliono vedere i loro problemi quotidiani risolti dal livello di governo più vicino a loro e vedere l'Unione Europea in azione solo dove è necessario.
Nada hay de la visión de los ciudadanos europeos en los planes de este futuro de Europa que nos quieren vender. Y en realidad esto es así porque para el progresismo el futuro ya está escrito de antemano. Para ello solo hay un camino posible y todos debemos transitar por él.
Działanie dokonać się musi na różnych poziomach. Jest ten poziom najniższy, to najbliższe nasze otoczenie, społeczność, miasto, kraj i tutaj podstawowa rzecz, którą powinniśmy robić, to nie oddawać tych kompetencji, jeśli nie musimy, a...
¿Cómo se puede ver enseguida? La doctrina que profesa este consenso de izquierdas niega totalmente, radicalmente, la libertad humana y la verdadera diversidad de las naciones y las personas. Porque excluye la posibilidad de que pueda haber caminos diferentes y soluciones diferentes a los problemas que se nos plantean a los seres humanos, tanto individualmente como personas, como colectivamente como pueblos.
I musimy się zastanawiać nad tym, jak zreformować Unię. I ta dyskusja była początkiem, tak jak naszej trasy, ale też wielkiej pracy, którą musimy wykonać, żeby zmienić, zreformować Unię, żeby ją dokonać resetu Unii Europejskiej, bo ten reset jest konieczny.
Insomma, anche in base ai trattati vigenti, le competenze attribuite all'Unione Europea possono essere non solo accresciute sulla strada della ever closer union, ma anche ridotte.
Ale do tego, żeby takiego resetu dokonać, nie trzeba tylko ekspertów, ale również polityków. Musimy przekładać idee na konkrety polityczne.
Добре дошли в София.
Welcome to Sofia, the second stop from the tour of the ECR in the European capitals in which we are discussing the future of Europe. The ECR group in the European Parliament started this campaign in December last year in Warsaw in order to give the floor to the citizens of the European countries who are speaking about their future. We are in a decisive moment in our history, a moment in which we have to take one of the two roads to the superstate, EU or Europe of the nations. The ECR believe that Europe of the nations is the future, and that this future of Europe is related to more Bulgaria and recognizing the needs of citizens both of Bulgaria and the other EU member states. Each of you can become a part of our event by sending their questions in comments during our live streaming in YouTube or in Twitter through the Ask Reset EU hashtag for us in Facebook and on our ECR The Future webpage. This evening we have a special guest, Professor Richard Legutko, head of the delegation of Law and Justice in the EP and co-chair of the ECR group. Professor Legutko, you have the floor.
I would like to welcome everybody to the second event of the ECR Europe's Future Tour across Europe. We launched this debate series a little more than a month ago in Warsaw to explore positive options for the future of Europe, options that are rarely discussed in Brussels. For far too often, every time a great debate is launched about Europe's future, we are told that the theme is going to be what do Europeans want and expect from Europe? But in reality, the hidden agenda is always what more powers can the EU take from the member states? For years, they have tried to tell us that the choice was between just two possibilities: more Europe or no Europe. So we have started a series of events to explore with national political leaders, experts, civil society, and citizens of our countries a sensible middle way between these two extremes. In short, we want a community of European states that does less but does better. We want to get Europe back on track by putting Europe's national democracies back in control. We want to rebuild Europe as a community that will offer our countries a platform for cooperation, that will promote European prosperity and security for generations to come. So, thank you for joining us today. I'm sorry I can't be with you, but I look forward to following the discussion. No doubt we'll have a lot today that the answer is not more Europe, but more Bulgaria. I hope the event goes well.
Благодаря на професор Легутко.
Thank you, Professor Legutko. We can only agree that the future of Europe is up to the strong national states. And for us as hosts, this means more Bulgaria and not more Europe. And we continue. Let me tell you how this event will go. It is going to be split in 3 parts: 30-minute political debate, 15-minute discussion live with the Vice Premier, Minister of Defense and leader of VMRO, Mr. Krasimir Karakachanov, and 30-minute discussion with young Bulgarian conservatives. Now we're going to be joined by the President of the ECI Institutional Policy Working Group, Professor Krasnodębski. Good evening, Professor. We're happy that you're joining us.
Good evening. It is very nice to, in this way, to be connected with Sofia, city I love. So Warsaw welcomes and greets Sofia. I am very pleased that we can.
Could you share with you how we can best affect the future of the EU?
I think that, as my colleague and friend, Professor Ryszard Legutko said, Europe today is not in good condition and requires reflection, and it needs a voice of conservative. It needs also a voice of Bulgaria, of Poland, of Polish citizens. We know that the political situation is difficult because Union becoming increasingly centralized organization, constraining the member states, imposing its policy on them. But also economical situation is difficult, not only because of the pandemic, but there's the questions of competition. There's also questions of the growing differences between regions. So, but probably the most important and most profound problem is in culture, in civilization, culture in the broad sense. So, you know, we have a discussion, debate, also in European Parliament about European values, but there are some groups, political groups, or the people with some ideologies that they would like to have a monopoly on interpretation what the European values is, but also what human being is, what is the family, what is the nation, what is the center and the heart of European civilization. And we need to participate in the discussion, and our voice should be heard.
Благодаря ви, професор Краснодемски.
Thank you, Professor Krasnodemski. If you allow me, I will pose another question. What can we expect from the tour of the ECR dedicated on the European future, and what is the next step that the ECR should take in order for the vision to be put forward for the new hope for Europe?
I think it's very important is to feel that we are not alone. You know, many of my countrymen, women, my compatriots think, we are alone in Europe. Nobody supports us in our vision, in our assessment of the situation. That is not right. We show in ECR how similar are our views and our problems with our colleagues from Spain, Italy, Bulgaria, Croatia, and so on. And so we have to build up a new kind of solidarity between us, between the people who have a different view. What is the future of the Union? Who would like to reset Union and regain Europe? As you probably know, our next step will be Croatia. We will follow up all this discussion. We will continue our tour throughout Europe and organize many meetings on a different level, also with organization, with civil society, but also on political level, in order to build up this new kind of solidarity and new kind of Europe, and then probably we will be successful also to reset Union and to reform this in this way that it is once again useful for European nations and for European people.
Thank you, Professor Krasnodemski. For all of us, it is clear that politicians can take the voice of the people to the places where important decisions are taken. For this reason, in the next part, we are going to discuss exactly with politicians this new hope for Europe. In the first part of the event, our guest will be Mr. Angel Dzhambazki, MEP from the ECR Group and Chair of the delegation of VMRO in the European Parliament, and Madam Maria Tsvetkova, member of the Bulgarian Parliament. Mr. Dzhambazki, good evening. Can you first state your vision about the future of Europe?
Good evening, and I'm glad to meet you, Mrs. Vlaikova. Good evening to all our viewers who think like us and who will be participating in the discussion on the future of Europe. Now, taking a cue from what the previous speakers, Professor Legutko and Professor Krasnodemski, already said, I can continue and tell you that now we are in the beginning of a very hard year. We have a very difficult one behind. Now, the entire European Union is at a cross point. We need to decide which direction we will take, whether we will be as unreasonable as we've been so far, spreading policies that are not typical for our European nations, policies that are trying to reformulate the relations in our societies, the relations between the state and the citizens, the relations within a family, or we'll take another direction to go back to our roots. So the European Union will be as strong as the weakest member state is. So we are definitively said that we have to keep the sovereignty of our states within our capitals. Professor Legutko said that we will speak of more Bulgaria. Indeed, when we are in Bulgaria, we will speak about more Bulgaria. When we are in Poland, we will speak about more Warsaw. That's the idea and the concept of the European Union that we joined, that we wanted to join. The future of Europe means for us more security, better guarding of the national borders and the borders of the European Union, elimination of the illegal cross-bordering. We also need to protect our nations from outer countries wherein war conflicts are being carried out. We need not to hear the voices or raise the positions of small groups that have self-proclaimed them to be important. We should not allow them to give us the direction that we are moving in. Let me give you an example. A few days ago, there was an emergency situation in the nuclear power plant Kozlodui in Bulgaria. Now, the Green Deal, as you know, is very aggressively and non-topically spread out and encouraged. Now, if this concept was a reality, we would be lacking electricity for this conference today, because 45%, 49% of the energy in Bulgaria used to be produced and generated from the conventional power plants in Bulgaria. Had these power plants been shut down as utopists wanted, we wouldn't have been able to carry out this conference. This is a clear example of how important decision has to be considered and made with great thought, and this is a reality for all member states. So, new hope for Europe means more sovereignty for the national states, better security for the borders, and also you saw how the election of the European Commission president was replaced. It was not what it should have been. So national sovereignty is important for states to be able to decide on their own for their own future. Now, Mrs. Tsvetkova, do you share Mr. Jambaski's viewpoint about Europe's future? Yes, good evening. I agree, and I'm very much on the same trail of thought. My decision, my viewpoint is that the only right way for the future of Europe is the Europe of nations, one that protects the traditional Christian values, one that protects the sovereignty of people, Europe that protects the national security, the national interests, and the sovereignty of states. Now, in the context of what we just mentioned, the illegal migration being the main threat for Europe, I would like, being the only woman participant and panelist speaker in this discussion, to speak about the importance of women's role in Europe, because women are very often the subject and the target of illegal migrants throughout Europe. Let me remind you, on a few such occasions, several women have been attacked in Cologne by migrants during the Christmas holidays, and there were migrants from Africa who targeted white women in Europe. Furthermore, illegal migrants are a threat to the traditional Christian family. Coming to Europe, they share a viewpoint that one man is entitled to have several women, several wives. Furthermore, they don't want to follow the rules and the rights of the traditional Christian family. There are men who live with several women at the same time, and we have signals for domestic violence coming from them. But then again, there are some circles that protect the Istanbul Convention, saying that actually the convention protects women from violence, but it's not the case. At the same time, there are the noisiest ones who protect the rights of the illegal migrants. So this is an issue that Europe has to attend to, and we have to introduce measures to return migrants to their home countries and to better guard the borders of Europe. Thank you very much, Mrs. Cvetkova. And now, from a distance, we'll have several other members of the ECR. We have Mr. Nicola Procaccini from Fratelli d'Italia, Mr. Herman Terč from Vox Spain, and Mr. Charlie Weimers from Sweden Democrats in Sweden. Hello and welcome. First and foremost, I would like to ask one question to Mr. Procaccini. Hello, I hope you can hear me well. Welcome to Sofia. Now, you have 2 minutes. 2 minutes for your viewpoint on what the future of Europe should be.
Sì, 2 minuti.
Yes, this is a confederation of independent and sovereign countries, Europe of nations, people who are proud of their national belonging. They cooperate with exceptional solidarity on various important questions from the agenda of our times, but they're free to decide and be independent to decide on anything else. This is not a union created on the desk of different technocrats in Brussels. This is not a fruitful soil of those who opportunistically claim to be Europeans, but at the same time are trying to bring down to common banality the principles. This, in our opinion, is the only European model which can face the challenges that Europe is now facing. There are 2 important issues: security and migration. Now, in this context, I believe that Europe's future has to do with the new interpretation of the term national border. Border means that we have to not only guard the territory, but guard ourselves, our values and national agenda, something that clearly defines us as a country, as a nation. Unfortunately, today we are facing a totally different interpretation. Member states have closed the borders in between themselves, but have opened to third countries, and this is not the concept of the European Union. This is a misinterpretation of the term border. This is what caused the dramatic migration crisis. This is a situation which threatens the countries that are at the outer border of the European Union, such as Italy. But also these are policies that are attacking the security and safety of entire Europe. What I mean here are the numerous terrorist attacks that we've witnessed. In my opinion, we need to move the front, the fighting front of migration events to further out to third parties. Very often these situations are supported by far left organizations. We need European guarding divisions that are indeed capable of fighting illegal migration, so that everybody who needs needs international protection could receive. And this is the common sense, I believe. This is the path we need to take. But unfortunately, we, as a group of people who think alike, are not too many. We are a small group, but we should not be disencouraged by this fact. I believe we will become more and more. We will have an opportunity to speak about this again, to return to this topic. And now from Italy, we move on to Spain, wherein we have Mr. Perch. Good evening. We speak of Europe.
I'm very happy to be with you in Sofia during this huge tour while we are discussing the huge challenges for Europe. Europe that some want to build behind the back of Europeans, and we should put a stop to this. We should stop vociferous groups organizing something like a super-state in which nations have disappeared, they don't have their own voice, and nations are left voiceless because democracy and nations go hand in hand. And so we cannot break the link between the will of the people and the responsibility of the governors. This is where they want to strike us. This is the link they want to break. We are in a situation of a grave danger because the powers, the social democrats, which are taking over huge regions of our countries. People are voting, thinking that they're voting for a conservative party, but actually they're voting for a social democrat project, which leads to globalism. This is the common project that we can see, and we can see that this European Union is trying to impose this mode. Less and less democracy, less and less accountability to nations, and this is how they circumvent the will of the people. We are more and more people who are like-minded people and think like this, but we should hurry, because the present situation requires urgent measures to be taken, because of fear before the reactions of the nations. And we can see sentiments created regarding the future of Europe, but at the same time, with regard to the huge bloc, which is a huge socialist social engineering project. They want to penetrate with instructions from the top levels to impose measures which do not correspond to what we think. They are going to try to militarize us from the top down without we having anything to do with these orders, without us being able to affect the decisions of those who make the orders. So this is why it is important that we take measures now, and this is why I'm so happy to be joining this debate. This is a cultural battle which is going on everywhere, and we should all, as representatives of the European nations, should be the first line there. I also thank you for the important questions that you posed, and now I give the floor to Mr. Weimers, who is live from the European Parliament. Hello, welcome to Sofia. You have the floor.
Good evening, Sofia. Good evening, Europe. 80,000. That is the number of migrants who arrived to Sweden in 2015 that the socialist government promised would be returned because they lacked asylum grounds. But Sweden's maximum capacity is 5,000 returns per year. That means it would take 16 years to return those people that came in 2015 alone. That ignores that the growing number of illegal migrants who refuse to leave voluntarily after having received a negative decision is far outpacing the socialist government's reluctant efforts to forcibly return them. Even Denmark, where mainstream opinion is highly intolerant of illegal migration, is only able to return 4.4% of third country nationals without asylum grounds from Somalia, Eritrea, Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan. My conclusion, getting back control is impossible under these conditions. Processing asylum applications on European soil is utterly unsustainable. Bulgaria, however, is on the right track. Since 2015, it has taken border security extremely seriously. Barbed wire fencing, patrols, heat sensors, even sending 1,000 soldiers to man the border. Bulgaria realized that unless you make it clear that under no condition will illegal entry be tolerated, the uncontrolled mass movement of people into Europe will never end. Africa's population will double by 2050. President Erdogan will continue his extortion policies against Europe to receive tribute from Brussels by sending migrants en masse to the border. Migration experts and government reports are clear. Migration pressures on Europe will continue to rise during this century of exodus. Are we going to resettle or return millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions? Impossible. Return policy can never make up for border security. If the Commission really cared about the future of Europe and not so much about getting praise from the liberal left, admittedly a big if, it should devote the entire conference to 3 issues: border control, border control, border control. Thank you.
I hope that all participants heard Mr. Weimer's recommendation. Thank you. Now, let me ask you the same question. What are the specific political steps necessary to popularize the vision of the Conservatives for the future of Europe? Let's continue with the answers in the same order that you started, Mr. Jambaski. Firstly, it will
бъдещето на Европа, нашата гледна точка да бъде съразмерно и равно представена. Защото това, което виждаме в момента, подготовката за тази конвенция, която трябва да промени договорите на Европейския съюз, огромен превес имат политическите сили, които са ляво-либерални. Огромен превес. Те се опитват да вкарат в тази конвенция десетки неправителствени организации. Всичките до една свързани, добре познати на българското общество, свързани с финансиране, общо взето от един и същи източник. Небезизвестният унгарски филантроп, така да го кажа.
The Hungarian philanthropist, so to say, did this. All these organizations are trying to change the way the EU is operating to circumvent the nation states. They're trying to
и всички вече разбраха, че тук не става дума за защитата на правата
defend the Istanbul Convention. We're speaking about something very prosaic, realizing topics which in our societies are not well taken, like single-gender marriages, the gender to be able to be chosen on a daily basis, which is why we're facing a huge battle. We need to be more vociferous. There are many people in the EP who are not representing the opinion of the majority of individuals. They're trying to stigmatize Central and Eastern Europe. They're trying But the governments in Hungary, Poland, who are defending their national interests, like Bulgaria, Romania as well, to be punished, to be threatened, to be stigmatized. This will be the huge battle. It is ahead of us. They'll try to mute us in any way possible. You saw what happened in the USA after the elections. There was a social platform with millions of followers was shut down because a small group of people in the Silicon Valley didn't like to hear what these people had to say, so they shut down their profile. This is grotesque violation of the freedom of speech and the right to express your opinion. Ironically, all our adversaries are trying to take our word from the position of freedom of speech. And this is Orwell, but he wrote it as a threat, not as a recipe which should be implemented. This is a huge battle. Madam Tsvetkova, your concrete steps. We are speaking since the beginning of the conference that illegal migration is through the main threats for the future of Europe. And we should explain why this is such a huge threat. Because, together with the migrants who pass through the Europe's borders, there are many illegal migrants who later become terrorists. Many of them are Islamic State fighters, and this is the huge threat for Europe, because they create on the territory of our Europe terrorist cells, and this is something part of the vision of the conservatives and should be followed strictly. This is the strict protection of the borders of Europe, to fund, to send more funds to Bulgaria and other countries which are at the border, to support Frontex very actively. Another important thing is to solve another problem stemming from the Mediterranean region. We are speaking about an inflow of illegal migrants which is controlled. This is illegal trafficking with the support of NGOs. There are many NGOs that carry out the illegal activity of trafficking migrants, and this costs the lives of many of them. So there should be a common decision taken here for the EU countries. Measures should be taken for the illegal migrants coming from the Mediterranean region to the shores of Europe, for this illegal migrant flow to be stopped, because they endanger the lives of these people, and there are many people who enter the territory of Europe this way, so these are a part of the measures that have to be taken from Europe with the vision of the conservative parties. Thank you. Now we move back to Mr. Procaccini in Italy. Mr. Procaccini, you have the floor.
Sì, grazie. Ho l'onore, sì, io la sento benissimo. Ho l'onore di essere coordinatore
I have the honor to be the coordinator of the Libe Committee of the Conservative Parties. There are three main topics discussed in this committee, and they are the most important topics, and they affect us all. The first topic has to do with the rights of the countries, and unfortunately leftist parties often, partially with the help of the populist party, use the rule of law as a stick to beat governments, conservative governments, which have been elected democratically in order to make the citizens of these countries change their opinion. and become in the mainstream of European politics. Angel, as you said, the other important topic, as Mr. Angel Jambaski said, is the digital regulation, which affects the relations between people and services and goods bought online, but mostly with regard to what travels online. It's unthinkable for there to be people censoring the opinion of people, independent of what these opinions are. If this opinion is illegal, then there is public authority which can say whether such person can be prosecuted according to the law. The third battlefield for the future of Europe is the right to have migration and asylum status. The globalism concept is that they want to open the door to everybody, and paradoxically, they're trying to build boundaries between the EU member states because some member states don't want illegal migrants. So, in fact, there needs to be a system for a border which should be hard and unchangeable. Boundary which should be able to stop the requests from citizens of third countries, and Europeans should be recognized the sacred right to decide who can enter Europe and to stop those who should not enter Europe. This is the right of the European peoples that we have to defend. We have to defend this very well. Now, Mr. Terč, let me remind you the question: what are the concrete political steps needed to popularize the vision of the conservative parties for the future of Europe? Mr. Terč? Shall I repeat the question? While we're trying to get in touch with Mr. Terč, let's try to ask the question to Mr. Weimers. I hope Mr. Weimers can hear us.
I certainly can. Thank you for the question. So the left is often accusing conservatives of spreading fake news, but on the issue of migration, it is us that should be presenting the facts because the facts are on our side, and it's the left that comes with a lot of propaganda. Just take their use of the word refugee instead of migrant. They do it all the time. We should point out that a very big part, 2/3, according to Commissioner Ylva Johansson herself, of migration to the EU illegal migration efforts is economic migration. If you look at the migration from Libya, which is a important hub in the Mediterranean for illegal migration to Europe, the three most common nationalities among migrants are Tunisia, Algeria, and Bangladesh. Hardly countries at war. It's a matter of incentives. Ships are going and meeting boats coming from Libya just outside Libyan territorial waters. And because of this, more people are lured into this perilous journey. And the smugglers do not even give the boats more patrol than just to be able to go outside Libya's territorial waters because they know where the boats are. It's a sort of coordination, spontaneous or not. What we should do then is to point to these facts, talk about migrants, instead of using the word refugee when it's not about that. We should present clear policy alternatives. We should point to the only existing proven example of managing migration by sea, and that's Australia, the Australian model, where the message is clear that in no way will you get asylum if you try to enter Australia illegally. That has decreased illegal migration, and it has decreased deaths by sea.
Благодаря ви много. Дали вече имаме връзка с господин Херман Терч?
Can we hear Mr. Herman Terch now?
Yes, I can hear you. Good evening, everyone. I'm very sorry about the technicalities I've just encountered. Now, we were speaking about very extremely important things. We spoke of how our sovereignty is being taken away from us, or at least there is an attempt to do this. Now, this, along with illegal migration, is the aspiration to destroy nations and to imitate the response and the resistance, because nations want to survive. We have censure, and we are censured, and it is spreading all around. So this is a spell, this is a vicious circle that we need to break immediately, because otherwise big corporations, big players will everywhere carry out their initiative against nations, against sovereignty, and our traditions. This we need to avoid. We should not let them monopolize the communications and the information, because we already have many examples of this. Now, it was mentioned already about this issue of the President of the United States being deprived of his voice in YouTube and Twitter. Now, Vox in Catalog, we are being censured in Catalonia, in Spain. In 2 weeks, we have a platform for exams. We will have, however, be deprived of our voice because Twitter is taking down our account, because Twitter has decided that they disliked some of the Twitter statements of Vox regarding the illegal migration, the Canary Islands, the Greek islands migration. But mind it, the Canary Islands are flooded with migrants from Morocco and similar places. All the migrants are young, healthy men who are conquering literally the islands. They're being allowed to come on the territory of the islands, and they fit very well. They just find their ground and feel very much at home. And this is why censoring the media and invasion is spreading all around. And the overall objective is to have a big one-country nation in Europe that will destroy the individual nations. And real democracy is only possible when we have independent nations. So we have to come together, act in cooperation to save the nations, to protect the freedom of communication and information. We need to protect all human freedoms that these big players are trying to cut and deprive us of. This is why these conferences are extremely important. Our rounds and our events are crucial, because we need to unite to fight for the freedom of our children and our freedoms. Now, you put forward some issues and questions that are extremely important, and curiously enough, our citizens, our nationals probably discuss on a daily basis at home. They are very sensitive and important issues that we need to attend to. Now, this was the first part of our discussion, but I will move on to the next part of the conference. We have citizens sending questions, and we will now give answers to those questions of the viewers. The first question is to Mr. Angel Jambaski. Now, this question is by Lubomir Miloshev. When we speak about the future of Europe, where is the place of Bulgaria? What is the role that Bulgaria has? Well, first, Bulgaria's role by protecting its national sovereignty, its national borders, national traditions. It also has to play a role of a country that gives a clear response as to where should Europe be headed to. This was what Professor Krasnodebski and Professor Legutko already mentioned. We need to avoid this direction of vesting more power into the European Union. On the contrary, we need to have a Europe of states wherein individual states protect their own interests, their values, and traditions. Only then we can prosper and move forward. Our role is to remind us why was the European Union created and what for. Now we need to go back to the situation of being one common European Union, better protecting the outer borders rather than putting borders in between the European member states. This is why we have our fence along the national border. We are under siege. This was a situation similar into in year 717, when Bulgaria was able to push back the conquerors which came from the east. Now, had we invited our Greek colleague, he would have said the same thing, that the borders and the territory of Greece are now under attack. This is why Bulgaria has to be the voice of reason, one that brings down to earth the European Union visionaries that have some different agenda. They spoke of the Amazonian forests. But that's great, it's important, but it's important for Amazonia, not for the European countries. So the role of Bulgaria is to once again remind what the topical issues are, Bulgaria and European Union, because they're important. The administration and the bureaucrats in the European Union are there to decide not on fantasies and far-fetched issues, but rather attend to the needs of the countries and the member states. And I'm very happy that the Bulgarian delegation is able to maintain the agenda as it was requested and voted for by the Bulgarian voters. You mentioned attack and conquerors. Often you're accused that you speak of threats and feel people intimidated. Well, I will remind you, our friend Vicky, several years ago, she was attacked by a migrant and who almost decapitated her. This was very near the building of the parliament. Now, because of this occasion and because of the pressure we exerted, very strict measures were immediately taken, and organization of the police and guards were introduced. So we were able to subdue the disorderly behavior of the migrants, both in the center and in the special migrant centers in Bulgaria. So this was the right step, and we should be able to do this quickly. And now we don't often speak of the threat of migrants because of the pandemic times we live in, but they are just as topical as before. A lot of money will be directed and redirected, and I expect that this group of migrants will find their way up in the news. Last Sunday, for example, in Brussels, 500 meters away from the building of the European Commission, there was a huge party, a very flamboyant event in the quarters they live. Now, you can't imagine what terrible consequences this could have in Bulgaria. In Brussels, there are residential quarters that are neither from Belgium nor from Europe. They are Maghreb, they are migrant closed communities, extremely threatening. Now we move to a question to Mr. Procaccini from Georgi Yasenov. Mr. Procaccini, being a representative of Italy in the European Union, Italy is a country greatly affected by the migration flows from Africa and Middle East. Now, what is the level of migration headed towards the European Union, and what are your forecasts on the migration flows in the future, and what should Europe's policy be in this respect? Yes, indeed. Unfortunately, in Italy, we have a left government, left-side government, and this only makes things more complicated. It makes our job more complicated because the government wants to open the doors to welcome illegal migrants flow. Last year, 2020, the year of the pandemic, this caused an increase of the numbers of illegal migrants, and the increase was 197%. Coming into Italy, the migrants then headed to different parts of Europe, and we can even not trace where they went. Why? Because the Italian police has no rights to trace the journeys of these migrants, and this is a great problem for Italy, but also for Europe as a whole. We have a very straightforward decision. We need to stop people. And this is the only way to avoid the tragedies that are happening with the vessels that travel in the sea. People mount boats, and they are very hopeful to reach Europe. They pay traffickers, and they hope that they will ultimately reach the coast of Italy and be saved by the border authorities. Very often, because of these expectations, these people never reach the shores, and the journey claims their lives, and this is bad for us all. So the only way to stop migration is to work with third countries and not let people travel or even begin the journey. They need to be able to receive shelter and asylum back in their countries, and we will iterating this to everyone, to the Commission, to every conference we're invited, until it is clear that that's the only way possible. Mr. Procaccini, you mentioned that people bought boats that often claim their life, but actually what choice do these people have? In one place, it's war that they try to escape, and then on the other end, there's possible death. So how can we stop them if there is a war going on in the country they're trying to leave? Yes, this is exactly the problem. From those who come to Europe illegally, only 10% are entitled and have the right to international protection as refugees. This is less than 10%. 90% plus are actually economic migrants. Naturally, they want to improve their lives, but the thing is that their life is not at risk where they live in their home country. So we need to provide international protection to people who are actually coming from a war states, where we need to create some territories in their own countries, and these territories should be under protection. But when there is illegal economic migration, this is what we should stop. In Europe, we have to choose which migrants need protection and which migrants need not protection, because maybe those who come to Europe, maybe they have similarities to us. Maybe they're Christians and they try to escape from their countries because of Islam's traditions or policies that are trying to destroy them. So we need to be able to control and manage migration, not be its victims. It is difficult sometimes, but if we manage, this could save lives. It's important to explain this to people, but that's reality. In Italy, very quickly, we were able to introduce a policy of closed doors, and this was received in Libya, in Tunisia, and there were few people starting the journey to Italy. And this is how decreased the numbers of lives lost at sea. So that's the only way. There is no other way.
Thank you. The next question is from Lauf. Mr. Terč, Spain has long-term experience in defending its external borders and the external borders of the EU. How is Spain controlling migration, and are there any legal crossings of your border? Unfortunately, we are now the country with the highest index of illegal migration because there is full lack of will on the part of the socialist government, which is not opposing this. And this has to do with what the colleague mentioned. The socialist government of Spain is acting against its own people, and therefore the result is visible. We are victims, literally, of invasion on the Canary Islands. There was a time when an attempt was made successfully to work with the African countries, to warn the countries like Senegal and other countries where we had success, to avoid this illegal trafficking. The same was done with Morocco as well. We have a huge marine border with Morocco, and at some places like Gibraltar, the distance is very small, several kilometers only, and it's very easy to cross this distance. Boats find it easy to cross, and this happens in the two Spanish borderline cities. It's up to Morocco's readiness to stop the migration flow. If Morocco wants to exert pressure on Spain, it unleashes the migrants. This is the same policy that Erdogan is playing in the Eastern Mediterranean. He's playing with migration to exert pressure on the neighbor. If there is a solid, hard European policy, this can be avoided, but there is no such hard policy. This is why we have the invasion of the Canary Islands now. Now the Canary Islands look like Lampedusa at the worst of times. They look like the Greek islands at the most critical times. In this sense, we have horrible experience now, and it can only be resolved through political will within Spain and with the will of all the Europeans to protect the external borders in order to have internal freedom of borders. Otherwise, for the future, and there is such a Schengen draft project to maintain open borders, but when we see that thousands of people enter through Spain naturally, this is something we cannot stand in a modern society, even less during a pandemic. This cannot be tolerated. People come without any control. This does away with sovereignty, security, economy. It undermines the basis of cohabitation in the country. Now we go back to Bulgaria. Madam Tsvetkova, how do you evaluate how efficient is the border along the Bulgaria-Turkey border? What should be done to control migration? The border along the Bulgarian-Turkey border, the fence was built in 2014-2015, and I'm proud to have been a part of, to be a part of the MRO, one of the parties which insisted to build this fence. Why is this important? What happened before this fence was built? The Turkish border authorities focused, literally, directed the migrants how to cross our border, and the border guards cooperated with the migrants. Now this cannot happen. Something also important, and I should note it with regard to the control and the migration pressure, is that thanks to Mr. Karakachanov as Deputy Prime Minister on Security, who will soon join us, we didn't sign the Migration Pact. This is an achievement because otherwise the doors for migrants would be widely open and they would be able to make their criminal acts. So these are important things. It's important not to agree to a quota principle which is proposed to have solidarity distribution of illegal migrants. To the question that our viewers are posing, the question we heard, and the answer is, thanks to this fence, we are marking a decrease in the registered illegal migrants. Thanks, according to statistics, 8 out of 10 illegal migrants are men. 1 woman, 1 child, and the other are men. What does this say? They come here as conquerors. They want to conquer Europe and to change culturally our family Christian values. So we have a task as conservatives not to allow this to happen. Thanks a lot. Mr. Weimers, now a question to you. All of us who monitor the work of the European institutions know that now they're working on the new Pact on Migration and Asylum. Where should the EU go, and what will your positions be? The question is posed by Hristo Ivanov.
Thank you for the question. The Migration Pact contains some good parts, better screening of individuals applying for asylum, for instance, tougher measures against countries who refuse to take in returning citizens. But it has some very problematic aspects. Let me point to some. The Migration Pact kills the Dublin regulations and replaces the first safe country principle with a criteria that is based on an asylum applicant's connection to European countries. So, for instance, if someone goes from the Turkish mainland 1.5 kilometers across the sea to the Greek islands and has a sibling or cousin in Sweden, or has studied in Sweden 20 years ago, Sweden will be responsible for processing his or her application. Mostly his, as most migrants are men, as previously stated. This will make frontier countries one-stop shops for asylum applicants, and it will be a major pull factor for further migration. And countries who have already borne a burden in the past will continue to bear the burden in the future. Countries such as mine, Sweden. That is, it's beyond me that the Commissioner for Migration, Swedish citizen Ylva Johansson, proposed that. But then, on the other hand, she's been part of our socialist government. She knows she can steamroll it. What the EU should do instead is to secure its border, is to establish the Australian model so that you will not be rewarded with welfare or even the right to apply for asylum if you try to enter the EU illegally. It should be very clear. This should be the EU's line, and that line would enable us to break free from President Erdogan's policy of tribute.
Благодаря ви, господин Ваймърс. Благодаря и на всички участници за откровения разговор.
Thank you for the honest conversation. Thanks to those who posed their questions. To end this discussion, I give the floor back to Mr. Angel Jambaski to sum up in 1 minute. Thank you, Madam Vlaikova. First, I would like to thank Maria, Charlie, Herman for their interventions. The fact that we have people joining us from different places in Madrid, Rome, Brussels, Sofia shows how important the questions we are discussing now are. Europe's future is secure Europe, zero illegal migration Europe, Fortress Europe idea, and to reinstate the sovereignty of member states for a nation's community. Thank you, Mr. Jambaski. We'll come back when we'll have the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Defense and leader of VMRO, Mr. Krasimir Karakachanov. Stay with us.
In the middle of the 20th century, after enduring another terrible war, the forerunner of the European Union was formed. Business was made easier with the creation of the single market, which also helped to make products cheaper. And then in 1989, walls were broken down as people threw off the shackles of communism. But since then, Europe has lost its way and is losing the global race. Jobs are moving out of Europe. and businesses are closing down. And at times, it seems that the EU is forever increasing their powers at the expense of national democracy, leaving voters ignored. Recognizing that something had to be done, people from countries all over Europe came together to deliver urgent reform. They agreed to form a group in the European Parliament that would listen to voters and lead the charge for greater openness, more flexibility, and a more practical approach to what Europe should do. Although relatively new, the European Conservatives and Reformists group is already hugely influential, and we've had success in making a positive difference to people's lives too. We have helped small businesses grow by opening up markets and encouraging trade within Europe and abroad. We have created job opportunities across Europe by developing the single market, particularly in digital and energy. And we have secured a reduction in the EU budget, which, whilst maintaining support for newer EU members, has saved taxpayers money. But we know that there is more to do if we are to make Europe deliver better value for everyone. Just one example is our campaign to stop MEPs' wasteful monthly trek between Brussels and Strasbourg, which costs millions. We'll continue to work so that instead of having more decisions made in Brussels, more and more decisions will be made closer to you. This won't be easy, but it can be done. We can make Europe work. So come with us as we take Europe in a new direction.
Ето ни отново с нашия гост,
We are
господин
back with
Красимир
our
Каракачанов.
next guest,
Със сигурност ни очаква много
Karakacanov.
интересен разговор,
For sure,
защото гостът
we will have a very interesting discussion because our guest is able to observe the situation in Bulgaria and Europe, being in three major capacities: Deputy Prime Minister, also Minister of Defense, and leader of one of the parties in the coalition in Bulgaria. So he concentrates in his figure major, very big responsibilities, all aspiring the better future of citizens of Bulgaria. And a better future is by all means a more secure future. So, Mr. Karakacanov, welcome. In your view, what Bulgaria we need in order to have a stronger Europe? Well, we need a strong Bulgaria. And when I say strong, not only Bulgaria having a modern army with well-organized structures of guards, border guards and police, but also in economically secure countries, because economic development is important to provide for the resources needed for security. Security requires investments from the national budget, and in order to have this resource, a well-working economy is needed. But when we speak of a strong Europe, that's another topic. Now, for 1 year already, we have been living in a new world because the pandemic of COVID-19 hit Europe particularly hard. Many actors hit the crisis with a real war. But do you think there are lessons to be learned from this crisis that would help us to have a better future? Well, actually, the world has been changing for more than 1 year, not because of the pandemic, not because of COVID-19. There have been changes. The pandemic only made it clear that one part of the world, the part that we are most interested in because of being a part of Europe, it showed that we are experiencing some difficulties, great difficulties. As early as the first months of the pandemic, the European central institutions in Brussels could not adequately react. The role of the national state was ignored for a long time, but it proved to be important. The beautiful cliches about us being citizens of the world, of the subnational institutions that will be managing the national states, proved to be void of meaning. What we saw is that the European administration, that actually no one elected, it was appointed, has been for quite a long time imposing its decisions onto the national countries. And this ultimately brought about the loss of functions and prerogatives of the national states. But when the crisis came on to us, it was the nations that had to react and introduce measures for the benefit of their citizens. So the citizens are today not asking what is Europe going to do. They are asking what is Bulgaria going to do about its citizens. So the crisis throughout Europe is not only related to security. It is affecting security, but actually it is the result that very subtly and very secretively the values and the foundations of Europe have been misplaced and have been substituted with something else. We used to have a democracy in Europe that was an example for the entire world. It was mimicked by the entire world, but some circles started introducing changes for the sake of changes. And this led to the weakening of the immune systems of the national states. And I don't mean in the health-related meaning. I have observations for Bulgaria and for several other countries. The national state is now expected to take measures to provide vaccines. People are not asking what is Brussels doing, for the mere fact that for quite a long time Brussels didn't know what to do. So I'm not criticizing the European policies. I'm saying this as someone who's observing the real-life processes. I'm not trying to smear the situation and to gaslight the issue, but that's the reality. That's the pandemic that actually brought to the surface many of the deficiencies that we've been living with for some time. But it also made it clear that even in situation that has to do with the life and health of many people, it's corporate interests that are being most important. But we can see the statistics. Those who were rich became even richer, and the middle class only got poorer. Maybe this is an aspect that we need to review. Again, I'm not someone who is a who has conspiracy sentiments, but those are facts. Some people became more rich, and the middle class declined in numbers. Rather, they become quite poor. And that's a fact, not only in Bulgaria, not only in Europe, but in the entire world. My next question is also related to security, but it dates back not to 2020, but 2015. As you know, Europe was under this very difficult test, with the serious test with migrant crisis. In your view, what direction should the efforts be made in order to guarantee the safety? Well, we all know our policy should be to not allow uncontrolled illegal migration flows towards European countries. We know that for a long time now, since 2015 actually, 90% of the people who came to Europe or are trying to even now come to Europe are not people who are trying to escape war. Those are people who are aspiring a better quality of life, because Europe can, especially the Western countries, they have a well-organized social system that cares very well about people that have their own income. Being Deputy Prime Minister with a portfolio of defense, I have participated in the process of building defense, the guarding of the border of Bulgaria, also managing the contingent in our army that divided some resources to send over to the border. I can say definitively that part of the people who've been captured crossing the border illegally, they owned very expensive smartphones. They had a lot of cash with them. They had expensive jeans. Many of them had those belongings. Some of them were poor. But this only comes to show that some part of the world, Africa, part of Asia, Afghanistan, there are people there who have for a long time viewed the propaganda machine of the cinema industry or industries alike that showed them that Europe is a very nice place and you can go there and have income even if you don't work. And why did this happen? We know where the problems lay. A lot of people have been associated with terroristic Islamic structures. We know this for sure. And going back to 2015, 2016, 2017, and see who are the people participating in the terrorist attack in France and other European countries, we can see the revival of radical Islam. And I'm not at all afraid to mention this Islam terrorism. We don't have a Hindu terrorism or Buddha terrorism, we have an Islamic one. So along with the regular migrants, we have people who are affiliated and later on are involved in terrorist attacks, trafficking of drugs or trafficking of arms. We know where the problem is. We don't have clear control and we have no clear rules as to who is entitled to come on the territory of Europe and who has not. And why did this happen? Because some European leaders straightforwardly invited the migrants, but they never said welcome to Germany. They did not provide the charter flights from Middle East or Africa directly to Germany. They, on the contrary, allowed for these migrants to cross all countries, Italy, Bulgaria, Greece. Why did this happen again? Because the demographic structure of the European population is changing. Europeans are aging. Somebody has to work in order to support the good pace of the European economy. And many of the European leaders thought that, much like the Gastarbeiter trend back in the 1970s, people would be coming to Europe to work in Europe, but also respecting the traditions, something like the Maghrebi migrants who came to Europe to earn money for their families. But it does not happen. Rather, people came who are reluctant or even unwilling to work. But furthermore, they did not respect our families, our values, our traditions. Even they wanted to impose onto us their understanding of how life should be, how religion should be, and part of the European leaders are to blame. But where is the balance between the values? Well, the balance is the greediness of the leaders. There is a deficiency of workforce because of the demographic structure in some of the big European countries and economies, and what they need is cheap workforce. And because the East Europe workforce has been depleted to some extent, and those who wanted to live in Western Europe already has gone there, the leaders needed more cheap workforce. And this is the problem. But again, the people who are coming are not willing to participate. Rather, they want to take from Europeans what Europeans have been building and building upon the last 70 years. That's the problem. Unfortunately, European leaders were the ones to encourage the migrants to take this perilous journey, to cross borders, to board boats, and actually those people are not to blame. Those who are to blame are the European leaders and their greediness. We had some serious discussion in the first part of our conference, and we can continue how conservatism and strong national nations can guarantee the balance in this globalized world. Well, it's artificial globalization. This is a utopia becoming a trend, very much like Marxism, that communist regimes tried to impose first the Soviet Union in the 1920s, 1940s, and later on other Western countries. The utopia that you can manage the world and its population when you cut everything from the one mold. This was the idea that everybody should be equal and the same. The proletarians have no homeland. Whenever the proletarian revolution wins, we will all be equal, there will be no individual states, and we will all have a great life. But this was a utopia through which the Soviet Union was trying to have a global influence. Very much like this, the national state is now something in the way of globalists. Globalists think of people as consumers only, but in order to make them consumers only, you have to take away from people their national prejudice and their national traditions, even traditions that come down to healthcare or cuisine or family relations. Making people the same does not make Europe stronger. The attempt to destroy national states or even marginalize them or deprive them from their functions are clear, but also brutal, very cynical. But what does rule of law mean? If you don't follow the rule of law, you will never get the European subsidies. But that's a dictature. It's people in Europe perceive rule of law as the principle that people should be equal before the law. And this is what rule of law means. But who and why should we be imposed the gender ideology? The rule of law, the superior law in Bulgaria is the constitution. This is where the rules are set, and it says all Bulgarian citizens, regardless of their faith, ethnicity, sex, education, are equal before the law. They have equal rights and equal obligations. This attempt to displace different rights and marginalize the traditional values and way of living that actually are the foundation of our good life ultimately make the individual states and the sovereign states weaker. So this crisis should be managed by the national state. And when you make the national state weaker, you weaken the structure of the European Union altogether. I can't imagine the European Union like the Soviet state. I can't imagine a headquarters and a group of commissioners deciding on behalf of everybody else without asking me whether I agree to do this and this, but I don't want to go into further detail. Because this is wicked. It's something that causes erosion of the strength of the national state. It also erodes the responsibilities and the structure of community. We are not living in the Middle Ages. We are living in a highly developed civilization that's namely because of the Christian values and the traditional family relations, because of this international and interinstitutional relations. So unification is actually a problem. But where is the difference between unity and unification? Because when we speak of Europe united, we still have division lines. The quotas, the pact, we have a division between new member states, old member states. So there are disparities. Well, there are contradictions because someone is trying to impose rules onto somebody else. obstacles, and naturally resistance is there, especially in Eastern Europe. People are very sensitive. Back in 1943-44, they were left to manage on their own. Roosevelt, Churchill and Stalin, three big actors, decided and divided Europe. They wrote on a pack of cigarettes, Bulgaria, Czech Republic, and Romania. They were left in a system that was imposed to us by force. And then in Fulton, Mr. Churchill came and said that he was surprised by the Iron Curtain that came to life in Europe. How can he be surprised when he was a main participant? Now we suffered, the European Union, the Eastern Europeans, we suffered this situation, and now again we are again impose some rules, rule of law and rules alike, without even a discussion. Czech Republic, Hungary, they voiced their protest, but then again, there is no sincere debate. Again, we are divided into New Europe, Old Europe. If we are a union, we need a dialogue of parties with equal standing. Otherwise, there is a turbulence and contradictions. Now, if tomorrow somebody replaces Orban, do you think that Hungarians will become more, will change their views? I'm saying that there should be equal attitude towards all member states of the European Union. I will not give an example at the last meeting regarding the situation in the Western Balkans, where there was a party trying to impose onto us without asking us. But this is an approach that a great number of the European citizens dislike. So normal debate and dialogue is lacking. We need not double standards, and we have double standards. Yes, we have double standards, and this only makes Europe weak. We have trials that we are undergoing. Christianity, we have also Christianity which is under attack by the Islam. We also have the Russian influence. And I'm not saying this, I'm saying this because I'm analyzing the situation. Unless there is trust between the allies and the European nations, this only makes Europe weaker. And this will bring along even more serious problems in European perspective. Who needs this? In my opinion, this is a mistake.
We promised to have interesting conversation. Thank you very much, Mr. Karakachan. One thing is for certain, not only politicians can change the rules of the game. Young conservatives and people from the civil society can do it as well. This is the new hope for Europe. And the conservatives and reformists take this into account. This is why the next panel will be dedicated on discussion with young conservatives.
Sin fe no habría Europa.
La liberté est le fondement de l'Europe.
Respekt für das gemeinsame Erbe.
Tradition binds our continent.
Non c'è valore più importante della famiglia.
Europa jest dobrem wspólnym. Różnimy się, ale powinno nas łączyć wspólne dziedzictwo. Powróćmy do Unii Europejskiej, która z tego dziedzictwa wyrasta i która szanuje narodowe tożsamości. Only the European Union without arrogance, based on solidarity and mutual respect for its member states, can regain the support of the European nations. We can do it together.
Добър вечер, дами и господа. Казвам се Кристиан Шкварек и съм представителят на групата на европейските консерватори и комунисти за България. Днес имам изключително удоволствие да ви представя, може би, най-интересният панел за вечерта, а именно този касаещ ключовия въпрос всъщност за нас, а именно има ли как точно консерватизмът да е бъдещето на Европа? Ако има как, какво трябва да направим за да се случи това? В този панел ще ни помогнат няколко изключително интересни и ерудирани събеседника.
Very intelligent interlocutors.
Доктор Любо Канов е психиатър, писател и съосновател на партия
psychiatrist and co-founder of Code Party. Димитър Вучев is an economist and member of the Sofia Municipal Council. Thank you for being here with me. I'll give the floor to Любомир Канов first to start this panel. I can't wait to hear what he'll share with us. Thank you for calling me a young conservative. I'm an old conservative. They date back from the time of communism when I was behind bars for my views, and I have only strengthened my values, so I have the right to defend my values. Because they are under attack by neoliberal globalist march against normality, against Christianity, against the family, and partially against culture and the civilization of Europe. I hope that will help for this in our discussion. When we speak about freedom, I have a feeling about it when it starts being taken away from us. This is the freedom of conscience, of speech, of views, of traditions, culture. I can see in Europe more and more attempts to turn Europe into a melting pot, the way they tried to make us mix in the Russian sphere of influence and lose our national identity. I wouldn't like to see Europe in which we all individual nations are turning into impersonal, homogenized mixtures of people who have forgotten their traditions, who have forgotten their identities and national traditions. This is why I believe that a discussion about Europe's future is crucial, and it should be started by you, the young conservatives. Well, I just see myself as a guard of this tradition, and I join you with pleasure. Thanks a lot, Dr. Kanov, Mr. Vuchev. First, thanks for the great event. I'd like to welcome all our viewers watching us from all over Europe. In the short time that we have, I'm going to give you the economic viewpoint, and I'm going to have two parts of my speech. On the one hand, what do they have in store for us from Europe, and what we can offer. This week, the central event is the Davos Forum, where traditionally all the world leaders and the business leaders gather. They discuss the outlook from now on. Business meets politicians. They conclude big deals in an online format this year, which is different. But what did the global politicians, the world leaders, outline for the future of the world? On the one hand, from China, we hear about a new Cold War coming. From Russia, we hear about a possible issue with regard to new totalitarian regimes forming, and what is Ursula von der Leyen offering European climate, the Green Deal? This is the new reality they're trying to impose on us. Why? The purpose of all of this is financial. We all know that the Green Deal is worth trillions of euros. It will be huge. But what should happen for this? There should be a melting pot of nation states. There should be unanimity among various issues, and this needs a European project in the form of a federation, a single super state. But what should we provide with regard to all of the threats we are facing, and why is this also a threat? This means melting pot, doing away with our different identities. This means to have problems in every country. Mr. Jambaski focused on energy. The Bulgarian energy will be very severely affected by the Green Deal if it happens in the same scope and within the short time frame as the European bureaucrats have in mind. These are the huge problems that we are facing. Europe can be more conservative because in order to form itself in these scales, it has always been conservative. Historically, speaking about city-states, but after the Second World War, they developed in a different way. We are experiencing the problems from this, but speaking about the future, we should also remember the past. Thanks a lot, Mr. Vucev. Let's present three other people who join us online. They are young, active conservatives, and they are experts in their spheres. Firstly, let me present them. They are Dragomir Mladenov, Deputy Chair of the Youth Conservative Club, Сергей Петров, political analyst, and Любомир Цанев, chair of the Spike Student Club Bulgaria. First, I give the floor to the deputy chair of the Youth Political Club, Dragomir Mladenov. Dragomir Mladenov, you have the floor. Dear hosts from the ECR, dear participants, dear viewers, we are people who like our nations and we like our money. We don't have any doctrine where the society should go to, but we insist on the principles which has allowed it to reach here. Conservatism isn't a doctrine, it is a worldview. Our objective is to make a link between the past and the future, and without this link, being a victim to relativism with regard to natural givens like gender, social order, religious rights and traditions, we're trying to be realists when our adversaries are ideologists with rose-colored glasses which prevent them to see the abyss we are facing. What is this abyss? Let me ask you something. When did Europe experience its 9/11? I agree with the political scientists who say that this happened in 2015 with the migrant crisis. Globalization allowed many non-Europeans to see through the screen and the standard of living of Europeans and to wish it for themselves. In 21st century, revolutions will not be of the masses but of the migrants. I believe we have to protect our home, and this doesn't have to do with just protecting our borders, but make sure we protect our nature, energy needs, and our community values. What are they? Christianity, for example. You are asking what is the Europe I see. We have serious divisions ahead of us and different phenomena. I see Europe trying to protect itself, not only geographically in terms of its habitat, but our home, our bodies, because you will see this paradox that the most aggressive environmentalists are aggressively progressive with regard to people. They promote transhumanism, resurrect eugenics, and popularize abortion. Allow me to say something about the future of the EU. It is based on Christian democracy. A main concept in Christian democracy is that society is composed not of individuals but of personalities, which are realized in communities through the church, through the municipality, the nation, and we reach European community without doing away with the differences. It's a paradox that the EU that has a task to turn into a federation return the balance of power, just as in the 18th and 19th centuries. Now there is pressure and the balance, on the one hand, between the Visegrad group and the other countries. There is a south-north divide, a west-east divide. I don't believe that this is something bad, but I don't think that it can be overcome. This is a utopia to think so. Don't think that I believe the EU to be something bad or doomed. Quite the opposite. The EU shouldn't be the evil hero forcing its norms, because we'll hear this in the discussion. It should be an organization for cooperation around common interests, guaranteeing the security of its members. Thank you for your speech. Now I give the floor to the next speaker, political analyst, Mr. Sergei Petrov-Aragioni. Hello. Hello to all of you in the studio and around the screens. We heard a lot of things. I agree with many of them. But I'm concerned about several things regarding the future of Europe. One of them is the imposition of values which are not characteristic of Europe. I want to see Europe in which I shouldn't be ashamed I'm a Christian, because Christianity and being living in Europe are connected. What many people have tried to do with a sword have been achieved through Christianity, turning us into a huge family. Apart from Christianity, I'm also concerned about the migrant flow. We speak about radical Islam. Many people think this is too vague, but this has concrete dimensions. During the past few years, the numbers of people who determine themselves as Salafites has increased twofold. Salafites are the people who are in the heart of Al-Qaeda in Islamic State. These are the people who now live even in Europe. And while the European Parliament discusses the composition of a source, things that are not so important, and at the same time there is such a huge issue, and it is on the back burner, citizens feel less and less connected with the Union, and this Union, with time, will remind us, if it continues along the same lines, will remind us of a Union that we are very well familiar with, we in Eastern Europe. Thank you, Mr. Petrov. Very interesting speech. I can't wait to give you the floor for a second time in the discussion. And the next speaker is the political analyst and chair of the SPICE, Lubomir Tsanev.
Hello, and thank you very much for this opportunity to participate. Now, regarding of whether the future of Europe is conservative, the answer could be either yes or no. If we look from the perspective of what the short-term future is, the answer is no. And the example is the current representation in the European Parliament, where the only right-wing party is the ECR. And further example is the resolution adopted against Bulgaria, wherein we have things such as the Istanbul Convention, hate speech to be included in the criminal code. They wanted us to recognize the Macedonian diaspora, and the only chance of overturning this trend was the fact that the resolution was also directed against the government, wherein we have representatives of a party which is in the European National, the ERP. But in order for things to change, we need several more political serious events. Good thing is that this false liberalism is now showing its true colors, and those are the colors of true communism. We are witnessing senseless things, and one of these are the new Green Deal. This is nothing more than yet another attempt to steal from the pockets of the European taxpayers. At the same time, we turn a blind eye to real problems, as China holding 1/10 of the investments, foreign investments in the bloc, and that's 1/3 of the entire business. We saw what happened during the pandemic. China increased its investments in Europe by 4 or 5 times, and this means that now China owns 1/10 of the business in Europe. At the same time, we have a neighboring country that is trying to procure some imperialistic views to introduce them. And we are discussing over meaningless issues. And at the same time, we're ignoring real problems. And this is due, in my view, to the many years of peace we've been living in. When a country has no problems coming from the outside, then it creates its domestic problems. Now, this could be an attempt, you can refer to it as an attempt to make people with having equal rights, but at the same time, it only shows that that the central power is not able to attend current problems. At the same time, it's trying to generate problems to solve them and then look better in the eyes of people. Thank you, Mr. Tsanev, and all the 3 panelists that join us online. I will ask other questions later on, but I will now turn to Mr. Kanov once again to ask a question. Dr. Kanov, you're a former political prisoner in the regime prior to 1989. Probably you're one of the people in Bulgaria who can best recognize when the community is starting to lose the thought, when there are political or when the society is losing political or economic freedom. Can you see such a trend now? Do you see the start of such a trend in Bulgaria or Europe? And if yes, what is your advice to young people, how to counteract such trend before it's too late? Well, control over the individual starts with controlling their speech and their thoughts. What communism tried to do is to do so that people don't have incorrect thoughts, but it did it by force. Now, today, we have an oral described approach disguised as freedom. And this approach is trying to use fear and shame as mechanisms through which young people could have ideas of a false freedom, about a neoliberal utopic freedom. And by introducing hate speech, replacing it with politically correct language, and by identifying specific victims and providing them with specific rights, it can do so. Now, not only people, but climate has fallen victim. This is a Marxistic approach. If you individualize a victim, could be a nation, could be a race, could be a group of people, but by doing this, once you do this, you can become their savior, their protector, and step by step, you can also take away their freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And this is what is happening in the schools, the gradual erosion of young minds. Very equally, the feeling of national or sexual identity is becoming more vague, or even the feeling of being a Christian. And we end up with people who are ashamed, if called racists, people who know they will be punished if they attempt to express their views publicly at work or in universities, most liberal universities in Europe or the States. If you express yourself as a conservative or right side affiliated, you can be expelled. This is how we we see the lack or the loss of freedom being lost. This was before introduced by force, but now the mechanisms are fear and shame and the indoctrination from a very young age towards the left. Many disciplines, soft sciences, sociology in the West, most teachers in Western Europe and the States has been overtaken by teachers and professors with left affiliations. And this is the problem, because this is the starting point of diversions, and this is how we spoil young minds. And young minds should be the future of Europe. Now, you are now addressing a very hot potato, a very important question, the hate speech, which is the key towards introducing political censure. Now, Mr. Dimitrov spoke of political groups and the threats of Islamism. Now, if liberal activists are after the hate speech, why it is not the case when it comes to radical Islam activists? If there is censure against hate speech, Salafism and Islamism should be targeted. And why are there not, as hate speech is being targeted by us? My view is that liberals don't speak about and do not defend causes because they know them in detail, they know the inside. They do it because it's the mainstream. They don't know what the Salafists are. They don't know what the ideology problem is. They don't know they are in the heart of the most cruel terrorist attack that we witnessed in Europe. The Salafists are not decreasing in number. On the contrary, they are increasing. And the other problem is that many of those who have been long living in Europe, they have radicalized and they changed to being Salafists. So I don't know why Europe believes that Europe can manage the newcomers where it cannot manage even those who've been living in our continent, on our continent for generations. So this is one major problem. Conservative people who are Christians and believe in very normal things are now labeled as fascists or Nazi or oppressors by liberals, and they're simply taken out of discussions or debates, labeled as not normal. And apparently the attempt is to make everything that's liberal the new normal. That's a problem that young people will be facing throughout Europe, and it is a reality, as Dr. Kanov mentioned. You cannot imagine how many teachers and professors with left side affiliation have been flooding the universities, and those who define themselves as conservatives are being pushed to the periphery. Those are people who are very, very noisy. So probably in Bulgaria, the attitude of liberals towards conservatives will become similar to what it is in Europe, aggressive. Apparently, we have very heavy liberal left-side censure towards conservatives. But you spoke of economy perspective. But the censure comes from private companies, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So what is your explanation, Mr. Vucev? We have people from the extreme left who want strict regulations, and apparently it's the private companies that support this process. So, being an economist, where do you see the logic? Well, from my prism, the economic logic is very simple. In order to exist, these big companies, Amazon, Google, Facebook, their journey was outlined back in time by the American government, and this allowed for them to become big corporations. The rule that they played along was meant to make them big corporations. This was the beginning was in the in the United States, and then they further expanded to Europe and other parts of the world. And what do we witness now in the Silicon Valley? Because it's the place, the cradle of the new technological person's mindset. Their companies have very strict protocols of what the behavior of a person working there should be. Even if you apply for a job, there should be values that you need to have. If you have right affiliations, that the human resource who examine you before recruiting you will know this, and they will not allow you to be employed, even if your professional qualities are fit to the job. So the company are so intertwined with the state, so private business is something we can hardly talk about. And censure is similar to what Dr. Kanev said. There is strong penetration of the left affiliations in universities, in the States and in Europe. So introducing the new mindset is not difficult at all. The biggest plus advantage of the European Western society is also its biggest shortcoming. There was no communism there. We, however, suffered this obstacle, but because of the situation we've been, we are very sensitive. We have different views compared to Western society. Therefore, for Bulgaria particularly, I'm an optimist. I can see this in our society. Unfortunately, we cannot influence Western societies. They have to go through their own experience in order to see that they're making mistakes. Now, Mr. Mladenov, you spoke of Christianity and Christian values, and I want to ask you, how can a Christian person manage this great attack against their values and tradition, especially when it comes from big corporations and mass media? What is the way to counteract? Thank you.
I'll try to be brief. We as Christians have hopes, but example is very important, because when we hear propaganda, people may be convinced that Christians are not normal people, that if you have fun, you are normal. But if you are normal, they can ask you, why are you doing this? So this is my answer, through hope and giving a good example. This is a positive note that we could end on, but I'd like to end with the youngest panelist, Mr. Tsanev. Being the youngest, right, do you see conservatism as the future of Europe, given that we're living in Europe, young people have problem adopting our views and values? How are you doing with the chair of a youth student club? How do you promote these values? Can you see conservatism as the future of Europe? As I mentioned in the beginning, yes, I have hope conservatism to be the future of Europe, but not the immediate future. You said that young people are more liberal. This is normal. What they believe isn't liberalism, however, isn't the classical liberalism that we have studied as people who have studied political science. They have some weak form of socialism, because as every young man, they're attracted by these thoughts, and their views have not been put to the test yet. They don't know if they will fail or not. But with age, they will probably see that this is just a utopia. As regards the question how I'm doing with the chairman of this student club, it's tough. For example, I had a colleague and we were the only people who said that one event should be shouldn't become a precedent. Several weeks later, there was an online signature initiative. We wanted Professor Bliznashki to resign. People said that we were protecting Professor Mirchev. In universities, gradually people will be pressured. 1 year ago, there was a letter against us because we had organized a memorial march with Fatherland Club with regard to the Nova agreement. We, however, started establishing Plovdiv and Bulgar's branch. We are expanding, and I believe that the more people understand the state we are in, the more people understand about what is going on outside Europe, they turn to conservatism more and more. So the way for us to direct them is through massive information campaigns. For example, trying to explain what is happening in neighboring Turkey. We're trying to understand whether the Green Deal can happen, or is it yet another occasion to steal. So we're trying to communicate with people, tell them what reality and truth is. Thank you, Mr. Kanov. Unlike Mr. Tsanev, you were alive during the censorship era.
И тогава ли би желал да ви попитам, като че ли малцинството от хората осъзнаваха, че това е
Did the minority recognize this is something to fight against?
Този проблем на това младите да бъдат събудени, да бъдат вкарани в тази идея, че трябва да се борят, или повечето хора също бяха летаргични?
Make young people fight, or were young people lethargic as they are now?
Ги интересуват тези казуси. било то Мирчев, било то цензурата,
be the Mirchev case, censorship, or the Green Deal. I think we should make an effort to awaken, so to say, young people. The main thing in the past was resignation through fear. However, there were young people, and I like them the best because I was one of them, who liked the freedom of the West. We were dreaming of this freedom. We liked Beatles, the Rolling Stones, all these groups. We ourselves started playing the guitar, albeit not professionally, because this was linked with freedom. When freedom finally took place, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, and everybody could travel freely, it turned out that, in fact, many of the people, paradoxically, that we adored were the seeds, the foundation of the new liberalism, of what would later flourish as hippie Marxist professors, extreme left-wing professors at universities and whatnot. What we thought was freedom turned out to be the beginning of a new type of reality. Paradoxically, as to how people were living in the past, they didn't live a happy life. Most people didn't like their lives, they just existed with the small happiness moments, to be able to buy an electric cooker or buy a Moskvich car or panel block apartment. In these years, the soul of Bulgarians was burnt, and it's hard to have this returned. Many things have been demolished. The village was done away with. The people who sang traditional Bulgarian songs and played them were silenced. They died early. People like me who tried to escape were shot at the border, shot dead. I hope that the picture you depicted will not be repeated again in Europe. I believe we heard quite interesting theses how to avoid this and why it's important to avoid this. Thanks a lot for being a part of this. Now I'd like to leave you with a very interesting message from Croatia with regard to the next host of this tour is from Ruža Tomašić.
Hvala kolegi Đambackom i hvala Bugarskoj na sjajnoj konferenciji koja je pokazala da male države moraju raditi skupa i da male države mogu napraviti Europu onako kakva bi doista trebalo biti ako se držimo, razgovaramo, dogovaramo. Europa ima budućnost, ali samo kao zajednica suverenih država članica, ne kao super država. To se već pokazalo na puno stvari koje su se događale, da Brisel nije bio učinkovit kako oni misle da je učinkovit. Zato 18. veljače Hrvatska će biti domaćin ove konferencije. Drago mi je da ćemo vam moći pokazati kako zapravo Hrvatska funkcionira, mišljenje o Europskoj uniji iz Hrvatske, naše stavove, naše potrebe, jer vjerujem da će ova konferencija pokazati da Europa, a i Hrvatska, a i sve druge države ima doista kvalitetne ljude koji znaju rješavati probleme. Dakle, ne koncentrirati svu moć u Briselu, nego ostaviti državama članicama da odlučuju o većini onoga što je zapravo jako važno za pojedine države članice, a naravno da imamo nekakve zajedničke interese. Dakle, pozivam vas u ovu prekrasnu državu, nažalost nećete moći biti osobno ovdje, ali ima vremena, Bože moj, dolazi ljeto.
Бих искала да благодаря на всички
I would like to
участници
thank
за
all
ползотворните
participants
дискусии,
for the
както и на госпожа
discussions
Томашич за
and
нейната
Madam
покана.
Tomasic for her
Бъдещето
invitation.
на Европа
The future
не
of
е
Europe
просто
is
едно
not
събитие.
simply an
Това е
event.
обиколка,
It's a
през
tour
която
through
европейските
which the
консерватори и реформисти
ECR
целят да достигнат до
want
обикновените
to
граждани,
reach common
да чуят техните
people,
мисли и
hear their
идеи
thoughts
и
and
да ги пренесат
ideas,
в Брюксел,
and
там, където се вземат
transport them to
важните
Brussels,
решения
where the
за
important
бъдещето на
decisions
всички
for the
нас.
future of all of us are
За
taken.
повече
For more
информация
information
относно
with
следващите
regard
ни
to our
спирки
next
с европейските
stops
столици,
around the
следете
European capitals, please visit
ecrthefuture.eu.
ecrthefuture.eu. Finally, I give the floor to our host, Mr. Angel Jambaski. You have the floor. Thank you for the wonderful hosting.
Тези, които са изкушени от историята, ще разберат за какво става
Дом
дума.
спредни,
И така в кратко обобщение заключение.
Finally,
каква
you
е
understood
идеята
what the
на
idea
европейските
of the
консерватори и
European
реформисти за бъдещето на Европа.
conservatives and reformists
Разбрахте срещу какво се борим
is
ние.
for the future of
Срещу
Europe. You
лицемерието, срещу двойния
understood
стандарт,
that we are against
срещу
double
цензурата,
standards,
срещу
hypocrisy,
утопиите като зелената
censorship,
сделка
utopias
и
like the
опитите
Green
да бъдат
Deal and the
променени
attempts
нашите
to
общества
change
срещу
our
нелегалната
societies
миграция,
against
срещу
illegal
опитите да бъде
migration. Again, we're
променена
against the attempts to
идентичността,
change the
самоопределението на европейските
identities,
нации и народи.
self-determination
За
of
какво се
European
борим
nations.
ние?
What are we
Борим се
for?
да
We are
възстановим
for
достоинството на националните си държави.
rehabilitating
Борим се да
the
запазим суверенитета на националните си държави.
virtues
Борим се да
of the
запазим
nation
нашия бит,
states,
традиция
our
и култура,
sovereignty,
религии,
our way of
защото,
life,
както преди
religion,
малко всички, които
culture,
участваха в
because
втория панел,
all of
също
the
така много
participants
интересен,
in the second
споменаха
interesting
християнските
panel
корени на
mentioned the
Европа
Christian
и те
roots
наистина
of
са
Europe,
такива,
and they are
дали
such,
православни, дали католически,
be
дали
it
протестантски, дали
Catholic,
униатски, християнски са
Protestant,
корените на
or
Европа.
Eastern,
Те правят това, което ние
Orthodox.
днес виждаме като история,
What's
като
important is
западна
that the
цивилизация. Това
roots
трябва да бъде
are
защитено и трябва да бъде
Christian, and
запазено.
we should
Така виждаме живота ние, така
defend
виждаме
these
нещата ние.
roots. This is
Благодаря ви
how
още
we view
веднъж, че
things.
бяхте сред
Thanks a
нас.
lot for being with us.
Искам да
I would
поздравя
like
и екипа на европейските
to
консерватори от
thank
Брюксел, който е
the
тук,
team of the
за да прави това
ECR
предаване
in
и целият
Brussels who made
технически
this
екип, който вие
possible,
не виждате,
and
които
the
направиха
technical team who
изключително
made
много усилия, за
this
да има
possible.
това
They
излъчване
made a
днес в
lot of
няколко десетки
effort
европейски столици.
so that we have
Бъдете
this
здрави и не
streaming.
забравяйте нашата
Stay
основна
healthy
битка
and don't
Европа да се
forget
върне там, където
our
трябваше да
fight
бъде,
is
именно в
for Europe
Европа на
to
суверените
return
отечества. Благодаря ви,
as
приятна
Europe of
вечер и до нови
sovereign
срещи в Загреб.
nations. See you in Zagreb.